So this is my learning analysis journal number 4, specifically related to the topic of creating learning environments and thinking about what are the most conducive ways to creating productivity in a classroom, as well as encouraging, I think, healthy interaction between students, as well as just whatever you can do to sort of maximize efficiency in your classroom too, and help students maintain routine and sort of self-regulation and self-awareness. So going into the first part, which is just the experience part, I want to talk about the special education classroom that I work in. Over the course of the day, I work in many different rooms, but in terms of where my home base is and where I take my breaks and those spaces, it's in my lead teacher's room. This room is a square, so if you can picture that, and the door is on the south end of the square. And in it then is sort of an amalgamation of tables. They've got some tables that can hold 2 students. They've got some tables that are fairly large but only really have space for 1. They're kind of these like half hexagonal tables that aren't really conducive to having multiple people work at them unless there were 2 of those put together, in which case then they're plenty big, but solo they seem to only really fit 1 person, which is okay, because in that classroom and then in the other special ed classrooms in the building, there's really never more than like 6 or 7 students at a time, which is interesting, I guess, kind of when you think about how a traditional classroom oftentimes has at least 20 students, and I would say more typically also has closer to like 30 students, depending on what your school district is. So in the room outside of those tables, along one wall is my lead teacher name is Katie. Katie's desk is in one corner, and that kind of faces the smart board, which is also at the south end of the room by the door. And then throughout the rest of the room, there are sensory stations. Along all the back walls, there are like comfy chairs. Like there's a couple bean bags. There are a couple, I'm going to say this wrong because I don't know how to say it, but is it Adirondack chairs? And then a couple of like rocking chairs that have like really nice cushions on them. And then in one corner is a swing, and that swing is highly coveted, to the point where it seems that it can create tension. And so then that kind of moves me into the processing section, this next section, where because there's no real seating arrangement and things are a hodgepodge, I think it can be really, it's flexible, right? So it's easy, chairs and tables are easily moved and can adapt to whatever situation, but when it's kind of just in its like standard setup, I don't think it's really conducive to having students work. It seems like it's more so like a resource room at times rather than a classroom, even though Katie will teach a class in there every hour. Kind of going from that too, I guess I just kind of thinking back to that swing, because the swing is what I really want to pay attention to. When I think about sort of motivations and I think about what it's like to sort of create these sort of social situations in a classroom, that swing, because it sort of makes students territorial, sometimes they just won't focus. And again, all of these kids are typically have an IEP of some form, so they might need structure or routine, or they might just obsess over something because that's kind of how that's what they're focusing on for the day, and that can make things difficult for sure, and to the point where we've even had to remove that swing at times. So then going into the generalizing section here, so kind of observing this, I really started to look at the swing in the last couple of weeks, just to sort of see what it's been like. When the school year started, I had a student named Bryce, and I maybe mentioned him a couple of weeks ago, who he would come to class, or he would come to school, and he would just sit in this swing, and he would pretend to fall asleep, and he might even be asleep. He would even be asleep at certain times, and he would sit in it from first until third hour. Now this is something that we had to work with in person with Bryce. to actually, you know, work with his parents to be like, okay, you can't just come here and sit in this spot, because if you do sit in this spot, then you don't go to class, and you don't go to class, then he would typically have a bad day because he just would never engage. And when he doesn't engage, he doesn't have social interactions with kids that he really benefits from. But that also then kind of caused a problem, right? Because you have these other students that want to sit in the swing. And at one point, because of the way that Bryce would behave and how his routine would just be to come sit in this chair or in that swing, he would, you know, we had to take it down. And when we took it down, that caused almost even more chaos with students, because not one, it had taken the swing away, which the kids wanted, but also it created a difference in the room. And just for that being different, then kind of would throw kids off their routine, off their schedule or structure that they were so used to. For me, it's, you know, it's interesting that kids really want to sit in the chair. In my position as a sped para, I typically will help out between rooms in our special education wing. So literally across the hallway is another room that has a swing that kids don't obsess over in it. But that room, a little bit different than Katie's, has a small alcove where it has a separate light. It's almost like I don't want to say like a separate office, but it kind of feels that way. There's no door. It's just a wall that kind of sections off a part of the room from the rest of the main room. You definitely can still hear the teacher talking on the other side of that wall if you are in it, but kind of acts as a natural barrier to get away from just the other stimulation in the class. And if that is something that a student needs, I know that, for instance, in this room across the hallway, we have a weighted blanket for kids if they're having a panic attack or some sort of episode, whatever it may or may not be, that just they need to calm down for a bit. It works, I would say, almost far better than just kind of having that swing that's still out in the open. Additionally, when I worked at a middle school for about a month, they also had kind of like a separate room that special ed kids could go into if they needed just a break or a stimulation reset, or anything. And it seemed to work really well. As a general rule, it wouldn't be too hard to transition back from that. Whereas, you know, the swing could really cause, again, an issue over our territory. So then taking that to section 4, the practical application section here. When I designed my classroom for this assignment tonight, I really kind of kept in mind sort of the idea of how do you keep everybody together, but how do you also allow space if kids need to break away. I know that not everybody has the same experience that I did, but I think I really benefited the most from the times that I got to interact with my peers. The days that if I was having a hard day at school, like, I was able to latch on to my friends, and I think a lot of that was fostered through teachers that would try and make a connection with me. So in the sense that, like, for instance, I think I wrote, I'm trying to think about what assignment it was that I wrote about my band teacher being super influential to me. I think that was my learning experience with the superheroes that I wrote last weekend. Well, my band teacher was awesome, and she had this really unique way of just being able to get in touch and build a relationship with her students. And even though her students would have different interests, she could then talk to two students and kind of could pair them together based on interests, that kind of thing, and be able to create friends that way. And that's something that I, as a teacher, hope to do. I hope that my room would facilitate something like that. The special education room, because it's so the class sizes are typically very small. Something that I notice in other rooms is that these rooms are designed really to be calming. You know, you want a space that's not super busy. You know, in that one assignment that I think it was week 2 or 3 when we talked about the classroom, where the 4th grade teacher had a billion different things going on for their kids, like jumping jacks in one corner, and then a room or a reading, a book group or book club in another a book club in another corner. Didn't seem conducive to making those different sources of intelligences work. So if you can keep things calm, I think you can approach things better, and you can plan, right? You can still structure time to reorganize your room if you need to do that, and then communicate that with your students and schedule that ahead of time if that's something that you want to do. But otherwise, I think keeping the room calm, and keeping it inclusive and keeping it fun, and making a classroom your own, but not just but your being you and your class, not just you. Even though I think it's important that you put yourself, as a teacher, you put yourself out there and you put your interests out there, because it hopefully models for kids the way that social interaction should be, and kind of learning to respect people of all sort of types and interests, and whatever makes them different and unique. I think that with the classroom, I know that in the room that I designed, it's kind of I would say best case scenario, and is only possible with a ton of money. I have a smart board and 2 TVs in my mock-up, and in the special ed classroom that I work in, it's a smart board and some old tables and a computer that probably started when it was bought, probably ran Windows XP, and now has some form of Windows 10 on it. So it's looking at that. What's the feasibility of that, and how do you make the most of the space that you have? Where we sit currently with the special ed classrooms, that the swing is up and it is back. The student Bryce, who I mentioned earlier, he's made significant strides in his behavior and the ways that he handles things, and so that's allowed us to get the swing back up and installed. And sort of, if we're seeing any issues with students in the space, it's because students can't get into the space, which is a whole other topic in general, and I won't get into that right now. But when I look at some of the other classrooms that I've worked in, sort of keeping things peaceful, keeping lights dim and not bright, because fluorescent lights, I think, are extremely draining in a classroom. It's sometimes you need them, right? If it's like a science classroom and you need to be able to see and you need light, that's great. But if things are on a screen, keep things a little bit darker. I think that helps too. So, this is my learning analysis journal for space, or creating learning spaces, and that's the practical application of it.